Welcome back. My name is Tim Gordon. I'm here with Stephen Hayes, one of the founders of ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, and we're talking about the two-day advanced skills training that you're giving in Toronto and in Montreal in April of 2016. So Steve, welcome back.
I'm glad to be here with you.
Tell me, Steve, what happens in these advanced skills trainings? It's 2 days back-to-back with you.
Well, increasingly where I'm trying to go with more advanced skills is on flexibility of applying methods, some of which are developed by the ACT community, some of which that may be methods that were developed elsewhere, or things that people already know how to do, to be able to apply those flexibly inside the model. And so basically, I've come to think that what's critical is to be able to see flexibility processes in flight, to be able to shift and target ones at will, to sit on it if you think you need to persist, to be able to shift to other ones and to do that with facility, and to be able to cycle back and make those reads and see if we're seeing progress. One of the wonderful things about ACT in terms of how we've developed these methods allows us to do advanced training that is skills oriented and takes what people already know and yes, put them inside a model, but put them inside a model in such a way that you're not living in a straitjacket. We're sitting right now just doing a meta-analysis of this, of nearly 50 mediational studies that are successful, that have shown that psychological flexibility tends to move with ACT methods, and when it does, that's what predicts outcomes, even above and beyond symptom change. So one of the things that has been hard, I think, for clinicians, and you probably know the evidence that sometimes science cynics throw at psychotherapists, showing that experience in doing psychotherapy or the person's personal confidence in their skills as a psychotherapist, both of those things do not correlate with outcomes. And part of the reason why, I think, is that when we're dealing with skills that are not simply verbally governed, kind of just knowing how, but in the sense of knowing the book knowledge, you have to be able to go through a process of contingency learning, of learning by experience, of trial and error, doing things and seeing the results of them. So a lot of what will happen in the advanced training is experiences in doing that. But just like if I was going to teach you how to shoot a basketball, and I said, there's the hoop over here, here's the ball, bounce it and shoot it, and then I put a blindfold on you, and I said, shoot it 1,000 times, and you had no idea whether or not you even hit the basket and whether it went through, I can guarantee you those 1,000 shots would have no impact on your skill in shooting the ball. If I take the blindfold off, it will. You can take somebody who maybe they're not following a classic form, maybe they're doing it their own way. There are people who have played in the NBA who shoot the ball in ways that coaches say are impossible. Literally are Hall of Famers. And why? Because with enough experience, people can learn, how to hit the mark. Well, the problem clinically that we have is, what's the mark we're trying to hit? How do we know that the ball's gone through the basket? And what those nearly 50 mediational studies show is, if you hit the mark of increasing the person's psychological flexibility, you are doing things which will be important even at the end of follow-up, even above and beyond something quite a bit better than symptom change. Symptom change can actually be a mislead. And certainly clients saying, yeah, I feel better, I'm doing better, is a misread. And so people get confident because they get lots of praise from their clients, but it doesn't necessarily predict outcomes. They see maybe even changes in symptoms, but that doesn't necessarily predict changes in outcomes. So we can sensitize people who are in the clinical role to these processes. And when we do that through the kind of more experiential training methods that we use, people have a guide that's a moment-to-moment reliable guide. There's even studies showing that what's happening in session 2 and session 3 in objectively rated transcripts, or what you can actually see in session, predicts what's going to happen in follow-up on these flexibility processes.
Wow.
So it gives us an exciting and different way that's not one size fits all, and it's also not, it has to be invented here. Because it doesn't matter what the methods are. You can use the methods that you know. Most of the depth-oriented clinical traditions and the evidence-based traditions across the board have methods which will move psychological flexibility processes. We're learning that psychological flexibility mediates not just ACT, but other of the, not just third-wave methods, but there's a few studies now showing that when cognitive therapy, for example, works, it works not by changing people's thoughts, but by inducing cognitive flexibility, which is a different idea. It's not, eliminate the irrational thought, put in a rational one. That's not the critical thing. It's being able to think more flexibly and to allow thoughts to be used based on their functional utility and what people are trying to do. So part of what I want to do in the advanced training is to open the door to clinicians taking all of the things that they know and have come to rely on, and instead of, you're going to come to a training and I'm going to, put the stamp of approval on your head, now you're an ACT therapist and that's the only thing that you can do from here forward, or, we're going to be unhappy with you. That's not a realistic and useful model of what evidence-based therapy should be. Instead, it can be something more like, how can you see these processes in flight, target them at will, stick if you want to, shift if you want to, and be able to use not just ACT methods, but all of the methods that you've learned, and look at the changes that you see right in front of you that are reliable predictors of clinical outcome.
That's such an incredible statement, Steve, and I think it really needs to be underscored. That point that you made there, I mean, we hear it so rarely, which is, that these evidence-based practices don't need to simply be this manualized treatment telling you the techniques and everything, what to do from session to session. You're talking about clinicians being flexible themselves.
Exactly. Well, and part of what we have found is that psychologically flexible clinicians can model, instigate, and support psychological flexibility in their clients. And there's a place in there that is important, which is the therapeutic relationship, because it turns out that these flexibility processes are at the core. We actually have evidence for this. I'll review some of it in the advanced training. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on data, but I will definitely touch on these data because they're so important, that they're central to what is going on in an empowering therapeutic relationship. So we've been, as a field, dealing with these processes from the beginning, but what science can do can tell you, it's this one and this one and this one that are most important. The way I usually say it, they can give you the 10% that do the 80% instead of having to worry about the things at the margins that can just confuse. And there's lots of things inside our clinical traditions that are probably not so important, but then there's things in there that are important, and when you know kind of what's really doing the work, and you can see it right in front of you, then the art and the relationship and the heart of your work can come fully into the room without you feeling as though you have to leave the evidence-based community in order to do that.
Wow. So this is a great point maybe for us to jump off and talk about. I mean, there's going to be people who are interested in this ACT training, especially the advanced skills, who are coming from a background of DBT, Gestalt, perhaps even traditional cognitive therapy.
Yeah.
How can they apply their clinical traditions to this model? Because it sounds like you're talking about this clinicians getting flexible.
Yeah. Well, and you've named a really good set there of, if you had to pick one thing that ACT just looks like from the outside, you'd probably say Gestalt. Yeah. I think you would. And many Gestalt therapists don't know this, but the originators of Gestalt psychology included some people who are out of the same tradition that produced ACT. I won't tell that story here, but maybe I'll do that in the workshop, since I know that there's a lot of Gestalt folks. people like Les Greenberg, et cetera, know this, but there's many rank and file Gestalt folks who think that the behavioral community is the enemy.
Yes.
And it's actually the mechanistic behavioral wing that's the enemy, but the contextualistic functional wing was actually part of what created Gestalt in the first place. But so that's part of it. People recognize these deep philosophical, contextualistic, holistic qualities in the two traditions because they came from some of the common roots. But the other thing is that in the Gestalt work, I mean, the importance of the therapeutic relationship and this kind of horizontal relationship. Gestalt folks have that same sensitivity of not wanting to go one up; they want to get down with another human being. I think is deeply empowering of ACT work and vice versa. If there's one thing that's probably more dominant in the ACT work, it would be the work on values and committed action, finding a way to put in that behavioral piece in a way that doesn't sort of do violence to this more holistic sense that we're going for inside a Gestalt approach. One of the things that it's in the experiencing scale, and some of the other things that have come out of Gestalt work is that we know that deeply felt emotion, if you flip it over, can sometimes be a pretty good guide to finding what really gives heart to your life in the form of values, the way the ACT folks mean it. So it's not just goal setting, it's not finger wagging, making a list and checking it twice that people are are being good boys. It's not like that. It's empowering people to move forward and the behavior changes that they need to do to create the kind of life that they want to live. And that, I think, finding a way to do that that's consistent would be useful to the space inside Gestalt work. I think would be helpful to people. They'll see something to take away there. The DBT folks, I mean, we now know that psychological flexibility both moderates and mediates DBT outcomes. My wife has a study that's being written up right now that shows that on the mediational side. And Marcia herself has done some studies on the AAQ, one of the primary psychological flexibility measures, showing how important it is to DBT outcomes. So we're kind of fellow travelers, and we've been mutually influencing each other for years. Again, I think ACT adds some specific things, especially over in the area of values, but also the specific diffusion methods. I mean, the people who are working with people suffering with BPD know that some of this emotional dysregulation that we're targeting can happen when self-judgmental processes get very close and heavy, and seeing that there's other ways in mindfulness work is helpful, but there's also more specific things that we can do from an ACT perspective that helps. So the ACT can easily be used as sort of a stage 2 to DBT. My wife is a DBT person and an ACT person. She's done randomized trials in DBT. That's how she uses ACT as a stage 2. But you can also use it to inform some of the DBT work that you're doing and some of the DBT groups and so forth. You can put ACT methods inside them without feeling as though you're really wandering outside the model. The cognitive therapy work, and the cognitive behavior therapy, there isn't any method that's evidence-based at the level of components that you can't combine with ACT. ACT is a model for how to do evidence-based therapy, really, of how to take those different components and bring them together. Can I give you? I'll give you a classic example out of cognitive behavior therapy. If you had to pick one thing, cognitive behavior therapy that we know is helpful, you'd have to say it's exposure.
Yes.
Anyone, if you said, quick, give me the one thing you absolutely know is really helpful.
Right across the board, exposure. Yes.
Exposure, okay. If you ask the average clinician why exposure is helpful, about 98% of them will get it wrong. What they're going to say is that with exposure, you get a reduction in unwanted emotion, and because of that, people are more able to direct their behavior towards things that previously they avoided.
Absolutely. That's what I hear clinicians say.
It's not true. the evidence is in on it. And the exposure-based researchers, I'll give classic examples of David Barlow, who I trained with, or Michelle Krask, who also trained with David and carried some of his interoceptive and so forth methods forward, now know that the critical issue is not the reduction in emotion, although sometimes that happens, but it doesn't mediate outcomes. What does is the change in relationship to your emotion. And that change in relationship, what you're allowing is more flexible responding in the presence of these repertoire narrowing events. Some of them are external, some of them are internal. There could be emotions, sensations. The interoceptive exposure thing is very important. They could be even thoughts, and they definitely can be external situations, and all of those working together. If you're able to behave flexibly in presence of those things that squeeze you down, that will produce a change in your relationship to these events. And that change in relationship is what predicts the positive outcomes. In other words, wow. Psychological flexibility really mediates the outcomes as one way to talk about it. So let me just give you an example.
Please do.
If let's say you were a social phobic, which you're certainly not by your work behavior.
I can pretend.
And we were, let's say, in a social situation. Perhaps we had actually deliberately sought out a situation where the person is, feeling as though they might be socially evaluated or.
Well, there's a mall right next door to me, so we could say we could do an exposure activity at the mall.
Okay, let's go to the mall.
Yeah.
You and I are going to the mall. And
but that's a freaky place for me, Steve. There's a lot of people.
A lot of people. Well, and you're looking at a panic disordered person recovering. I've had multiple panic attacks in malls. I understand how frightening they could be.
Yes.
So if we were to go to the mall, you and I, what I would be looking for is for an indication that you're sort of getting hooked and your repertoire is narrowing. It isn't just anxiety. You'll see it in, like, your eyes will close, your body will get rigid,
yeah.
You'll start looking away or even look up into your head. Your head will come down. You'll otherwise show, like, I want to go away from this environment. I'm not out with it, right?
Yeah.
So part of what I might want to do is I was doing acceptance and diffusion work. And let's say if I'm working with you right now, I might say, first, could you look at me? Could you come on out? I would stand in front of you and say, just look at me. And I'd ask you to just look in my eyes.
Yeah.
I'd say, I'm here. We're here together. We're conscious. And we're in the mall. Okay, so I would want to add consciousness to physical presence. If you just are physically, it's clicking out a roll, you're physically present with something you're exposing to, that's not enough. That's not how the process works. The process requires flexible, and we, even in animal models, you can show that, animals will freeze and look down. If you move them around with puffs of air or with paddles in the cage, the extinction works much, much better. You need to get the animal to interact with this fearsome environment. So we'll start off by asking you to come out. If I can get a sense that you're kind of with me, I might ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, how willing are you to be here right now? And if I can get this thing up where I'm at a 9 or 10 level, I'm willing to be here.
Yeah.
Just for that period of time. I might do something like this. So could we look around and just tell me who in here, as you watch these people go by, has the weirdest hairdo? They often do exactly what you did.
Yeah.
Laugh. It's a wonderful thing to do during exposure.
Yeah.
Laughter is a form of avoidance? No. But what it's showing is I can be here in this situation that's fearsome and do something that's interesting and something that's funny.
It seems like the opposite of that narrow repertoire. It seems to be broadening.
Expand out the repertoire. You have to be careful to time it and to do it not inside a distraction thing. I'm not trying to distract you. I'm trying to attract you.
Ah.
There's traction there.
Yeah.
There's no dissing.
Yes.
The problem with the distraction is we're going to use that traction, that pull, that pursuit to take away, to subtract, to dis.
That's right.
Of course, that's what the person's been doing with closing their eyes or with avoiding the mall in the first place.
Absolutely.
I can dis the mall, I just won't go.
Yes, exactly.
And that is exactly the journey the person's been. So what's the A traction, the with traction that's there? Well, one of it is people watching.
Yeah.
So let's do some people watching. I just gave you an example.
Yeah.
A little later on, we might go in and out. I'll do a little bit of exposure work, actually deliberately evoking the things the person normally avoids on the inside, noticing what their heart is doing. Same kind of thing with eyes open physically, but more psychologically. Meaning we're going to bring attention to the now in an open way to these things that previously had been repertoire narrowing, like noticing that my heart's beating, noticing that my body feels warm, noticing that I may be sweating, noticing that my face feels flushed, whatever the thing might be for you.
Yeah.
If I can sit with that for a little bit and then catch again that you're here, then I might do something like this. In a mall, one of the cool things you get to do is to buy things. Like if you just look around right now, if you were just free to go through the mall, if this whole thing could be put aside for a moment and we're just here in the mall buying something, what store here would most interest you in terms of something that you might want to buy? I might actually get it down to something especially that the person wants for themselves or for someone that they love.
Yeah, it's the holiday season. I'm wondering if that's where the values piece comes in, Steve.
That's where the piece
I could
comes.
say, I'd love to actually go and buy my partner something that they'd really value.
Exactly. And I would go through exactly that process in the mall itself of finding something where this purchase actually has some meaning to it.
Yeah.
And I might actually go through the process of walking with that person and making the purchase. But in there, the same kind of playful quality of going in and out and adding. So it might include things like what we think the people around us do for a living, or which store has the best architecture, or what are the things that you're afraid of in this moment that might happen. I remember doing this exact process with a client. He said, well, I'm afraid of freaking out. And I said, well, what happened if you did freak out? He said, I might just lose it totally. Well, what would happen? Well, I'd fall to the floor and I'd be unable to move.
Yeah.
And people would come and like, what would you say? I might just say, hey, help. And I say, okay, good. Would you be willing to lie with me on the floor and we'll go, help.
Wow.
Okay, we both lay down on the floor in the middle of the mall and went, help, and just laughed our asses off.
That's a commitment, Steve. That sounds like darn good exposure work.
For me too.
Yeah.
For me too. We've gone into the men's clothing store and ordered hamburgers. We've just had such fun. If you hit that space where you get, I call it the reverse compass, where when your mind tries squeezing you down, you as kind of a declaration of independence from the heart of it, say, okay, I'm going for it. And we've had really fun times in malls, doing silly things and buying things and people watching and, basically declaring our independence from this repertoire narrowing, problem-solving mode of mind that can squeeze your life down to a nubbin. And, many of our clients are suffering not just because of the anxiety, depression, etc., but because of the lives that they're not living, and they know it, and life starts being a mockery. The clock starts being a torment. The calendar is kind of a sneer. When you just see that life is going by and I'm not part of it. So psychological flexibility belongs inside our evidence-based. Now, what evidence do I have that that's better outcomes? Well, for one thing, ACT-based exposure in the recent trials with mixed anxiety disorders, especially for people who are more chronic and multi-problem, has better outcomes than traditional CBT. And there's at least 3 studies showing that people are more willing to do exposure inside an ACT model. And so at least those 2 things are known. And that's just one example of an evidence-based procedure where pretty good studies have come together to show that there's something added by the ACT rationale and the way that we do exposure that's values-based and flexibility-focused.
That's fabulous, Steve. And Steve, and I've got to tell you, I mean, exposure work it's really hard for me to convince my grad students to do exposure work.
Well, here's a recent study that just came out. Psychological flexibility predicts whether or not clinicians will do exposure. The clinician's psychological flexibility. Okay, so now really dig into that, and it's really one of these things where you go like, wow.
Yeah.
If we don't do the work here,
Yeah.
we can't do the work there.
Yeah. Our
And
work suffers.
come to us for that, right? And so really, this is something that we will pursue in both the intro and the advanced space, but finding that place in which we're here for the lives of those we serve, and that includes walking into those spaces where it's difficult for us, where, as a values-based journey for us. And it's what lifts us up and empowers us in our clinical work. But it also means that it's a different model of dissemination. One of the things that I look at the literature on dissemination, and people, I hate the word actually dissemination, because dissemination has this idea: I've got the answers, you need to use it.
Yeah.
You just need to use it.
Yeah.
And if you don't,
hierarchy.
Yeah, wait a minute. Who put the researchers up there? Some of these guys are not good clinicians, by the way. They're not.
I believe it.
They're not. Okay, so you get down in the trenches, and it's hard to do this work, and empower clinicians to do the work, and create a space in which, as a values-based journey, evidence is important because it fits with our values as clinicians, and these flexibility processes can empower us to do what is sometimes very difficult to do, like doing exposure work. And let's find ways to make it more possible for us, but actually also, I think, more effective and even more fun to do.
Yeah.
I love doing exposure work if I can get to that place where it's flexibility work.
Absolutely. Steve, you've been so generous with your time. I owe you a really big thank you. And I think, I just want to say from the heart, you've done such great work with ACT, with spreading ACT, spreading the love. I've benefited from it professionally and in my personal life. And, I also want to encourage those who are watching this video, join up to the workshop down below. But we're also going to post a link to the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science. It's a real community, and Steve, you had your hands in creating that, and it's a second home to me and to my colleagues. So
it's a community of people. You don't have to sort of check your ideas at the door. There's no secret little handshake. There's no set of ways you have to talk about things. You can come in just as you are with your ideas and be part of a conversation with a group of clinicians, but not just clinicians, applied researchers, but not just applied people, basic researchers, but not just that, evolutionists, philosophers, people of all kinds who are interested in creating a tradition that can create progress for the kinds of problems that people have and for the prosperity that we want to pursue. So it's just a inherently fun group. And I think in part because people are trying to apply those processes to themselves. They're trying to do it in the organizations, and they're trying to come together in community in the interests of others and not just in our own selfish interests. And that's just fun to be around. So if that's appealing to people, they'll find that there's, as people say, it's not a cult, it's a community.
It really is, and it's something special.
Yeah, it is. There's something you can't get around the CBS crowd without feeling as though these are people who have heart in the work that they do.
Yeah. Well, and it's clear from this conversation. I mean, even how we were talking about clients. I mean, Steve, you speak with such respect and with heart. I really value that. And hey, if you're watching this video, follow the link down below. Hit the subscribe. It's very reinforcing to me. Makes me make more of these videos. Join up for the training here with Stephen Hayes, the man who started it all.